Bruchim Abayim to the fourth and continuing series of Shiurim on HashkafahCircle.com, which are entitled The Oral Tradition of the Written Law. Last time, we spoke about how the two methods of what we would call redaction of the written text of the Chumash, al pi hagvura, b'pi Moshe Rabbeinu, how in fact actually this was done in two different ways. And Chazal understood this as expressed in the dispute, the Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish and Gittin Daf Samach Amar Aleph, that there is according to Rabbi Yochanan, Moshe Rabbeinu redacts oral texts which he apprehends through his nevuah in much the way as, for example, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, redacted previous texts of Mishnayos in forming the Mishnah, which is the basis of the Gemara. According to Reish Lakish, we have actually the creation of a text, and this is in fact actually akin to what we identified in the Gemara in Tesvavim and Beis and Tefurah of Yosef ben Yoaza, where in fact actually a oral tradition, a textless oral tradition which communicated from Rebbe to Talmud, creates in fact a text which, and then the Torah Shebi'al Peh, the oral law, is now transmitted through a text which can be used by several people, and hence begins a process of interpretation. So last week, I'm summarizing everything that came up before last week. So last week we actually saw how these two concepts of an oral tradition, which leads up to a text, either through redaction or through, I called text creation, actually was understood by two of the Gedolei Machshava, Reb Tzadok and the Gaon, in understanding the concept of Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah, that is, what is the definition of das, as is known, that Moshe Rabbeinu is the Soid Hadas. And in fact, Reb Tzadok, in describing Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah, we understood as being something which was akin towards the Reish Lakish type of redaction of text. That's the as Reb Tzadok understood that really, in fact, the das, which looks to be mezavik, which we can understood to be a type of redaction between the two spheres of chochma and binah, and of course, this chochma and binah are things which actually have to be apprehended in some type of a perceptual way. That's what Tzadok explains. The concept of abstraction, which is the Kabbalah of the Ari, is in a certain sense in a higher sheresh, nelam from Moshe Rabbeinu, b'bchinas chacham odef minavi. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu has to deal with things which are at hand, which we can understand to be texts at hand, and in redacting these texts through the bechina of das, then in fact this defines the nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's how we understood Reb Tzadok last time. The Gra, on the other hand, in his Perush of the Safra and de-Tzne'uta, understands the zivug through das of chochma and binah in a totally different way, as we'll see in a little while. We actually began speaking about that last time. Rav Chaim Heller, in his introduction to the Gaon's Perush on the Safra and de-Tzne'uta, there writes clearly that in fact the Torah Hanista was in fact an oral tradition, and that at one point in history, all of the secrets, all the nistarim of the Torah Hanista were actually placed and hidden in a text called the Safra de-Tzne'uta, and that all the zoyas of the Rashba afterwards are in fact gemaras which come to elaborate and to bring out the secrets of the tradition as they are encased and embedded within the text of the Safra and Sipur, just as the Gemara in the Teras HaNigla comes to bring out the important elements and understandings of the Torah Sh'Bi'al Peh, which are embedded in Rebbe's Mishnah. So therefore, in other words, Rav Chaim Heller says that this is in fact actually what the Gaon tried to do in this Peos Safra de-Tzne'uta. The Gaon was trying to recover this oral law that comes from Moshe Rabbeinu. Notice that the Gaon here is arguing directly on Rab Tzadok HaKohen, that in fact the Kabbalah's Hari has its foundation in the Torah that was revealed to Moshe Rabbeinu at Sinai, just as the Torah Shebechsav and the Torah Hanigla, so to the Torah Hanista. And the purpose of the limud of this Mishnah of the Safra de-Tzne'uta is intended to recover this oral law, this oral tradition of Torah Hanista, of the Kabbalah, of the secrets of the Torah, and to continue this tradition from the time that it was revealed to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai. This is what Rav Chaim Heller says. Now, the fact is, how did Rav Chaim Heller know this? Of course he knew this. He was a Talmud of the Gra. But I want to claim that not only did he know this, in fact, through his mishamish, his connections at the Talmud of the Gra, but I want to claim the Gra himself says this outright in the very beginning of the Safra de-Tzne'uta. So if you look in the, I'm in the traditional text of the Safra de-Tzne'uta, and the first daf is daf Aleph. I'll call it daf Aleph, Amud Aleph, actually, right, daf Amud Aleph. And there, the Gra, in a Perush, which is really, in fact, a tour de force, so the Safra de-Tzne'uta begins, where it says, Tana, Safra de-Tzne'uta, Safra de-Shalkala, Miskala. I'm not going to here give a shir in Kabbalah, Chas v'Shalom, but what is Safra? Safra is referred to the Sefer. So, the Gra says that, what is a Sefer? A Sefer, says the Gra, I'm in the second paragraph of the Gra, Dibra Maskil Safra, says the Gra, Sefer hu Giloi HaMachshava. A Sefer is something which reveals one's thoughts. Shamachshavu sasam ba'adam, because a person's thoughts are hidden in his, hidden inside of him, right? Ve'enu mizgala el yedei dibroi al ksavai. And they can be revealed in one of two ways, says the Gra. They can be revealed through his speech, or they can be revealed through what he writes. Right? And then the Gra speaks about that the Ein Sof is Mizgala, right? Also too, through in the world. And he goes to the creation of the world. He brings the Sefer Yetzirah, which says that the world was created, Uboras Eilamai, Kodesh Baruch created the world, B'Sefer, Sapar, Sipur. He created the world with three things, Sefer, Sapar, and Sipur. And says the Gra, right? So, says the Gra, Vinyano Shnei Svarim, for Sipur, right? So we have two Svarim. Two Svarim means Samach Peresh, says Sefer and Sapar, and then we have what's called Sipur, with a Vav between the Pei and the Reish. I guess it's also your two. So he says, why Sipur? Ki adibu pam achan is galib machshavasai. In other words, Sipur speaks about an oral communication. That's what Sipur is. Right? L'sapel means to, to speak verbally. Okay? Aval Sefer, but with Sefer, which means without the Vav, Sefer and Sapar. So the revelation of a person's thought occurs in two stages. Right? What are two stages? Echad, stage number one, and that there corresponds to what he calls Sefer. A person writes something in a text, in a book, right? And that's called Sefer. But the text is in the manuscript, but there's no one there to interpret it. Ucheni, the second stage is Sefer as Nizgala. But then when a person reads it, and that's going to be what's called Sapar, right? That's when a person reads it, and then a person's thoughts, which are in print or are written down, are now revealed to the reader. That's the second stage. But aval b'dibur, but through dibur, the process is immediate. In other words, one person speaks to another person. There's not actually a two stages which are marked by an act of writing and an act of reading and interpretation. That's what the Gaon says. And the Gaon identifies these with chochma, binah, vadas. Now, I don't want to go through the entire Gora. You're welcome to do so if you want. But I understand the Gora, the following thing. In other words, Sipur is das. So you have Sefer, which is chochma, that reveals the knowledge, right, in a written form, in a text. Sapar is the person who reads the text. He reads the text and he interprets it. It's an act of hermeneutics. But therefore, when these things come together, das, of course, is mezabek, chochma, and binah. When these things come together, you get das. What's das? Das is actually dibur. It's speaking. Which means what I understand the Gora saying is that when a person takes a text and reads it, what does he do? He recovers. He connects to the oral transmission as if he's actually speaking to the author of the work. That's how I understand what the Gora is saying here. So in other words, what the Gora is saying in this Perush on Safra, which is the first, second word of the Safra de-Tzne'uta, first word is Tana, then it says Safra. Then in fact, actually, the Safra de-Tzne'uta is the Sefer through the and the interpretation of which will bring the Gora, right? The actual text is the Sefer, that's chochma. The Gora, who reads and learns and interprets it, that's Sapar. I think Sapar actually means to count. They're called Sefer, and you count the words. The Gaon not only counts the words, he counts the letters, right? And then through and this act brings about what's called das. Das is mezabek, chochma, and binah, Sefer and Sapar, and you get Sipur. What Sipur? Sipur is dibur, which means we now recover the oral tradition, and the Gora through this connects with the old tradition, with the Torah Sheb'al Peh as it's transmitted orally from Rebbe to Talmud up to Moshe Rabbeinu. That's how I understand the Gora's Perush over here. And that's what Rav Chaim Heller was writing. Rav Chaim Heller was writing that the Gora understood this as a Mishnah, the interpretation of which recovers and places us within the dialogue and the oral transmission of Torah Hanista from Moshe Rabbeinu. That's exactly what the Gora is doing here. What the Gora is doing here is that Das takes a written text and a written tradition and converts it into an oral tradition which connects us with the oral tradition which preceded, which created the text in the first place. That's my understanding of the Gora's Perush, and that's my understanding of how Rav Chaim Heller understood what the Gora was doing in his Perush on the Safra de-Tzne'uta. Okay, so this is a very, very interesting thing. So in other words, what do we have in the Gora? Now, of course, the Gora is speaking about he's speaking about the Gora begins, and the Sefer HaMitzvot, of course, speaking about the creation of the world. And the Gora applies this to the text of the Safra de-Tzne'uta. But actually, in fact, this concept of textual interpretation is in fact actually universal, because if you look in the Hagor on the bottom, the Gora writes there that this process of Sefer, Sapar, and Sipur, Chabad, chochma, binah, vadas, is actually the process to which the Torah was revealed at Sinai. So in other words, this is on the Hagor at the very bottom.
The Hagor?
What? The bottom from the Gora, yeah.
And what is it? What's the lashon of the Hagor?
The Gora is that there's also by Matan Torah too. The Gora explains, right? And through the Gimel Sforim, Nasan HaTorah, the Kodesh Baruch gave the Torah. The Gora on the bottom.
They carry the whole shir. That Hagor.
That Hagor, right.
Okay.
Right. The Hagor is, I'll read the Hagor, since Rabbi Sedley sings this the entire shir. So the Hagor says, in Sivkat Aleph, Ve'aydei Chabad, Shen Gimel Sforim, and through Chabad, which is 3 Sforim Shalom Mishkaveh, so the balance, Niva Olam, V'ayoda, Ayadayim, through them, Nasan HaTorah. The Kodesh Baruch gave the Torah, and then the Gaon speaks about the Luchais, etc., etc. In other words, Chabad represents creation of the world, the giving of the Torah, and the interpretation of text. In other words, the Gra is just telling us how we think and how we connect with the tradition, right? No Kira proofs. This is real tradition. So, in other words, what we have over here is an important thing because the Gaon here is speaking about creation ex nihilo. What the Gra is saying is that the text is created ex nihilo from an early, not ex nihilo, but from the Platonic. That we have a creation of the text from what people would think is an amorphous matter to something which takes shape, but this is the creation of a text from an oral tradition. This is what the Gra is speaking about.
Say that again.
I should say that again. Okay.
Creation ex nihilo without the ex nihilo.
No, there's no creation ex nihilo, chas v'shalom. But we have an oral tradition, chas v'shalom. But the oral tradition is something which is not in the text, so it seems to us a little bit like more amorphous. And from that we create...
He's olam as well, though, in this.
Whatever it is. No, this is no chas v'shalom bris olam. But anyway, Kadosh Baruch, that's how we perceive a Kadosh Baruch who's in the world. The Gra is not speaking about Kadosh Baruch from the side of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. How Kadosh Baruch reveals himself in the world. Kadosh Baruch reveals himself in the world through a text, the text of the world.
So for us, creation does not look like creation ex nihilo?
Well, because a person can't understand creation. The creation from a Kadosh Baruch Hu. The Gaon always says in every place is that creation ex nihilo is mitzad Kadosh Baruch Hu. Mitzad Kadosh Baruch Hu. We see the world the way it is, and from the world, Kadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself in the world. That's the Ishtamud, the Gaon quotes Zoya, which is quoted by the Ari, the Rambam. Everybody interprets it, of course, differently. But the Kadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself. The revelation is not creation ex nihilo. Gaon is speaking about God's revelation in the world. Creation ex nihilo, Kadosh Baruch Hu created the world ex nihilo. The Gaon is speaking about revelation. The world is a text. And the Gaon is speaking about how do I relate to a Kadosh Baruch Hu as he creates the world through a text, through the either spiritual and physical worlds. That's the Gaon is speaking about. Now, so in other words, the Gaon here, in his understanding of Chabad, is very textual. It's a textual. He learns it textually. And he's speaking about the creation of a text from chochma and binah, which are actually, in other words, but it's interesting that through the creation of the text, this is something which is interpreted because the thing which creates the text is actually hidden within the text. And by that I discover the true meaning of the text. So now you might ask the question, well, and before the Gaon, where is this oral tradition? The Gaon would say to you that this is in fact hidden within the text of the Safra and de-Tzne'uta. Of course, interesting enough is that what actually a consequence of this is the Gaon understood that he's not just a scholar discovering, what a text is speaking about. The Gaon is actually, the text is just the means by which the Gaon actually continues the oral tradition. Very important. I understand in the Gaon that the Gaon understood that basically Kabbalah, is an oral tradition. And by just bringing this out, the Gaon basically continues this oral tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu.
An oral tradition which is not an oral, which is in the written text.
One brings it's been encased in a written text, but in every generation.
There's no Masira.
Right. Once in the text, therefore there's no. In other words, the Masira is done through the interpretation of the text. But once those Yechidim, the Il V'Kadish, Irin V'Kadishin, who are zeicha to understand this text, as Rav Chaim Heller says, so they are the people who can transmit this oral tradition. Now, I want to. This actually borders on what was the Gra doing b'chlal in Kabbalah, which I don't want to go into right now. Maybe we have another series.com devoted to Kabbalah's Gra, because a lot of people take the term of the Gra and they say all these nice things, this letter, that letter, he counts the words, this and that, all very nice, beautiful, brilliant Vortlach, But I don't think people really truly understand what the Gra is trying to accomplish. But in any case, that's another time, another place. Yeah.
If for the Gra, textualization is built into the creation process of the oral law, in what way do we still see it as b'diavad? The textualization of the oral law as being b'diavad?
No, because it has to be.
Very b'diavad.
So the Chaim Heller explains that of course these secrets were transmitted, had to be hidden at a certain time of history. Everybody says like that. The Rambam says like that in the Morning of Uchim. In other words, things which were transmitted orally at a certain time had to be hidden. Chaim Heller says because there are people who were there were people who were not worthy of understanding these secrets, and therefore because of that they had to be hidden. So the text basically takes an oral tradition and hides it within the text, and then Yechidim means individual people in every generation who are worthy of this can bring it out. That's how the Gaon understood it. That's how Chaim Heller understood it. He writes that explicitly in his Akdama introduction to these Sapar and Sipur. Okay, now I want to, in other words, There's a lot to speak here, obviously. We could devote another series, a whole series like this to this. But right now, I don't want to go into the focus of the Glor. The focus is, what do we see? We see that the Glor is speaking from the standpoint of what we saw in the Reish Lakish. We get the Safra and Aleph, that really, how do you create a text? And this is true in Matan Torah. And this has to be what Rav Tzadok said too. Rav Tzadok also said, because Rav Tzadok said a lot of things. Rav Tzadok said there was also an oral tradition before Matan Torah. And what Rav Tzadok acknowledges that there's also an oral tradition before Matan Torah. He said that Moshe Rabbeinu is part of the redactive process. But in other words, the Gaon understands that when you learn a text, right, you have to understand an oral tradition which creates a text. And I think that the way the Gaon learned the Safra is the way they learned the Chumash too. Now, of course, this is not the Chumash Chas v'Shalom. It's not an oral text transferred from people. It's Mipi Gvura. But the way in which we learn it, we have to understand the Chumash as a text which is created by an oral tradition. Even that oral tradition is the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. And this actually said none other than the Rashba in the Tshuva. Yeah.
You're asking about the Luchas, is he not?
He's speaking about Matan Torah. He's speaking about Matan Torah. The Luchas is the text created from that. I don't want to go to the whole Gor. He's speaking about the Chumash. I'm just speaking about the concept of the creation of a text. That's what I'm speaking about. If this is what took place in Matan Torah, this is probably what took place in the creation of the Torah Shabbat too. Okay, in other words, we're speaking about the Luchas is also part of the Torah Shabbat. I mean, the what's on the Luchas was what's on the Luchas is in fact actually written in the Torah too. Let's go further, okay? If you're interested in what the Luchas are, we can speak about a Gemara and Tafnan Beis about Vakama. The question is asked: what was written on the? How come a certain word was written in the Luchas? Second Luchas, not the first Luchas. We'll get into that Gemara another time. It's an emes on that, but I'm going to disagree with what he says. But anyway, what I want to do is I want to look at a Rashba. There's a Shuta Rashba, which is the Chelek Aleph. I believe it's Yud Beis. I'll tell you, the numbers of the Rashba are underneath the Tshuva, so I'm not sure whether the number here refers to the Tshuva before or Tshuva after, but I think it's Yud Beis. And there's a Shut.
What page is it on that?
Oh, in my old, no one uses Rashba anymore.
But it's on Hebrew books like that, so what page is it?
Oh yeah, I think it's Gimel, Dav Gimel, on Hebrew books, the first Chelek. Oh, very good. Baruch Shekivanti. Okay, so it's interesting that the Rashba makes a statement. I'm going to read the Rashba and translate it. I'm going to tell you what Rav Chaim Heller says in his Hakdama to the Sefer HaMitzvot on the Ramban. Says Rav Chaim Heller, says the Rashba, She'ein haksuvim, he's speaking about the Chumash too. She'ein haksuvim shoymirim hamilos, the ksuvim, scripture, speaking about all scripture, including the Torah Shabbat, right? Shoymirim hamilos, rak hakavana. What Scripture does is not to tell you the exact words. This is what the Rashba say, but the intention behind the words. This is actually the Torah itself. I said, Rashba, this is the Torah itself. Gam v'aseres hadibros kolakei. Also the seres hadibros. I think the Rashba is referring to the fact that we see differences between the seres hadibros and Devarim, and we see it in Shmos. The Torah was makbid only on the ideas, not the exact language. Now, Rav Chaim Heller says, this is apikosis. He said, well, put it this way, I don't know if that's a quote from Rav Chaim Heller, he didn't speak like that. But Rav Chaim Heller says in his Hakdama to Sefer HaMitzvot that this is certainly a forgery, it's not from the Rashba. But the fact is that the Rashba is actually basing himself on Ramban al Torah, and the two Rambans al Torah is basing himself is one in Bemidbar, in Perek Beis, Pasuk Yud Daled, and one in Devarim, Perek Beis, Pasuk Yud. That's an incredible thing.
He says that on the footnote says.
I think he refers to the Ramban. I think he refers to the Ramban here in the Tshuva, but if not, the Ramban says the same thing. I think he's coming for the Ramban. In any case, look at the Ramban.
How do we darshan out different things?
Wait. So I wait. Right. So like this. What does this mean? This is incredible. I mean, Rav Chaim Heller, Hagoy Rav Chaim Heller, right? Hagoy Rav Chaim Heller. I mean, which gadol in the 20th century came to him both in in Gafat, in Torah and Paiskim, and also in Chumash. Rabbi Yeshaber Soloveitchik called him his rabbi. Rav Chaim Heller, this is not from the Rashba. It's not from the Rashba. I want to say, first of all, you see from the Ramban, of course it's from the Rashba. But I want to say, what the Rashba is saying is what I'm saying here today. The written text of the Torah comes from an oral tradition. That's what the Rashba is saying. The oral tradition transmits the concepts, the ideas, the yesodus, and the secrets of the Torah Shebechsav. And the written text is the text which is produced from this oral tradition. Now, oral tradition, of course, means Moshe Rabbeinu Piagvora. But in other words, that's what the Rashba is saying. What the Rashba is saying is we have to look at the text as being something which is expressing in Ksav, a oral tradition, which is the oral levuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, which begets the text. That's what the Rashba is saying. The Rashba is saying, hu adova, exactly what I'm saying the last 4 classes. That's what the Rashba is saying, foolish. And the Ramban says this, everybody says that. Who doesn't say like this? Anyway, that's how I understand, is in fact actually the understanding of the Rashba. And the Chas v'Shalom, this is not a ziyuf, this is not a forgery. The Rashba says that the Rashba know how to learn Chumash. I also know how to learn Chumash. But I think that the Rashba, the Rishonim, are actually expressing here the idea that there in fact actually is a oral law within which is embedded the written text. And the written text can only be understood within the context of this oral law, this oral tradition. And in so doing, right, this is the Torah, HaMasura, from Moshe Rabbeinu, which was intended that we should understand it and interpret it, up the Drochim of Chazal, you give no midas, right? And in fact, this represents the true tradition of both the Torah Shelav and the Torah Sheb'al Peh throughout all the Doros from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu until today. This is in fact actually what the Rashba is saying, and I don't think it's not do I not think it's difficult. I think it's exactly what Rashba understood, exactly what the Torah Shelav was. Okay, now, so what we got up till here, we've actually seen, I think, both in Rishonim, both in Achronim, and in Chazal, an understanding of actually what was the nature of this oral tradition and how it comes to create the text of the Chumash, either through creation of the text, as we see in the Gra, which is Shita of we interpreting of Reish Lakish, or in the redaction of text, which is Rabbi Yochanan, as we saw in Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen. Okay, now, the question is, how are we going to take this and use this in actually understanding the Chumash? Because this is really the proof of the pudding is that as much as we can speak in Yesodis foundations, but where do we in fact actually see this actually exercised in the Chumash? And Amit Hashem, we're going to actually begin this actually pretty slowly. I want to focus the next year on Sefer Devarim and the relationship of Sefer Devarim to Sefer Shmois. In fact, actually, the Rashba said even the Aseres HaDibros, the Torah was Shema and the Indian. What does the Rashba mean that the Torah was Shema and the Indian, in fact, actually in Sefer Devarim? So we're going to Amit Hashem next week. We're going to look at Sefer Devarim. We're going to learn the Ramban, ala Chumash, and understand how, in fact, the Ramban employs this methodology in elucidating the very text of the Torah, Shebechsav, HaMasura Lanu, Moshe Rabbeinu. Until next time, for an undisclosed location, Yerushalayim HaKodesh, be well.